For the third video in this series, we're going to talk about the outer layer, or the rucksack portion of the light infantry's gear they would take on a recon patrol in 1990. The first thing you might notice is this is not an Alice pack. In 1990, a new rucksack was issued called the CFP-90, and that was only issued to Special Forces, Airborne, Air Assault, and Light Infantry. I believe the first unit to field it was the 10th Mountain Division, which was actually a light infantry division at the time without any specialized training in mountain warfare. But speaking of mountaineering, this is a mountaineering rucksack. It has ice axe loops. Now I have it set up with an entrenching tool where the ice axes would go, but it's a larger rucksack. And the thing I liked about it was it didn't really have a frame, so the Alice pack weighed several pounds before you even put it on, whereas the CFP-90 was very lightweight. So I prefer the CFP-90. Now let's go through what's in the rucksack. First thing I want to mention is the poncho. So as you can see, this poncho is woodland camouflage, and it could be worn as a poncho for, if it rained. But however, usually in terrain with a lot of thorns and things, so poncho didn't really work out that well as a rain garment. But what it was excellent at was a shelter. And in the final video in this series, we'll go out to West Virginia and go on a real recon patrol overnight, set up a poncho shelter. But basically what you'd have to do is tie off the tarp either with the drawstring in the hood or another piece of string. And then the poncho just becomes a big square sheet, kind of like the British Army Basha or something, maybe not quite as big. And you can use it to make a tarp shelter. So since the poncho didn't really work out well as a rain garment, I would have a Gore-Tex rain jacket. This was an extremely lightweight one. The first one that was issued to me was just so heavy it would pretty much take up the whole rucksack by itself. So this is just essentially a woodland camouflage Gore-Tex shell, and served me very well. When you go out on a reconnaissance patrol, one of the things you might want to do is set up a hide and observe anything from a road or a railway to an enemy position while concealed in a hide. So I would carry maybe a 3 meter by 3 meter segment of camouflage net with me to assist in creating a hidden position from which to observe the enemy. One of the heaviest things in my rucksack is the entrenching tool. This is a multi-purpose tool though, so even though it was quite heavy, it served a lot of different functions. One of the things is this edge here was quite sharp, so it could serve as an axe. This one is serrated like a saw. It could also serve as like a pick, because you could just unscrew this middle segment and then clamp it down. And then the entrenching tool served as a pick. And then finally, the entrenching tool could serve as an improvised weapon. So if you've run out of ammunition with your rifle and maybe broken the butt of your rifle over an enemy's head, and you didn't bring your bayonet, like we're not bringing a bayonet on this patrol, and last ditch, this makes a pretty good improvised weapon to smash an enemy's skull. Still talking about creating hide positions, one piece of gear that works pretty well is this folding saw. Even though the entrenching tool did have a saw on it, it wasn't a very good saw, so I would carry a folding saw to maybe cut tree branches to create camouflage for hidden positions. Even though we put a lot of effort into camouflage, sometimes you need to be seen. For example, if you're doing a passage of lines, which is a very dangerous time in a patrol, because it's basically when you're coming back into friendly lines, and if the friendly forces mistake you for the enemy, they might fire on you and kill you in a friendly fire incident. So I would carry the VS-17 panel, and I would just carry a small section of it. The actual panel is much larger, but this section is just basically 1 foot by 2 foot, or 1/3 of a meter by 2/3 of a meter. And then I could use it to, I could call them on the radio and say, hey, I'm about to reveal my VS-17 panel. I'm coming through your position now. Or of course we could use this to mark ourselves, mark our own position if we're calling in close air support, so the pilots know where we are so they can not bomb us. Or I could use it to mark a helicopter landing zone so that the if we're being extracted by a helicopter, we could stake this down, and the helicopter knows, you know, which landing zone to land at. You can use smoke in conjunction with this. I don't have any smoke grenades since I don't think they're legal to own military smoke grenades, but I can have a VS-17 panel. In 1990, I believe they were just fielding the modular sleep system, and the the middle layer of the modular sleep system was the patrol sleeping bag. Now, this is just simply an olive drab nylon sleeping bag, which is a vast improvement on what they had before then, which is like this massive cotton sleeping bag that didn't compress. And again, you'd have to put it in a waterproof bag and like strap it to the outside of your rucksack because it didn't even fit inside the rucksack. It's a horrible piece of gear. It's just hard to imagine that the Army would have ever fielded anything like that. But we finally got our first like modern synthetic sleeping bag with some kind of like hollow synthetic down inside. And supposedly the sleeping bag is good down to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit by itself. You'd maybe survive at that level, but it'd be pretty miserable. I think 50 was probably more realistic. But anyhow, on this patrol, we're just taking the patrol sleeping bag, and then we're taking the Gore-Tex bivy bag, which is also part of the modular sleep system. So if it rains or something, the Gore-Tex will keep the water out, and it also adds another layer to hold the warmth in. So between the patrol bag and the Gore-Tex bivy bag, you know, you're probably good down to 40 degrees or so that you would be comfortable. And anyhow, this Gore-Tex bag in particular is a good piece of gear. Another thing we were issued is this ground pad. Now, later on, I would learn to cut this down. This is a full-size ground pad, and it's just very bulky. It's probably about 2 feet wide and 6 feet long. And pretty soon I realized really the only thing I needed to keep off the ground is my torso, so I would cut it down so it would be smaller and easier to carry. But anyway, it's very lightweight, and then what I've got it rolled up with is this bungee cord, and I would always use a bungee cord like this in construction of my poncho shelter. I showed you my canteen, but I also like to carry something about like a Nalgene bottle or maybe just a soda bottle or some type of non-military water bottle, and I would use that because I was never a big fan of just plain water, so I'd like to make Gatorade or Kool-Aid or something like that, so I could do that in my civilian water bottle. And then I would have my military water bottle, which I couldn't do that with because it needed to be compatible with the protective mask, and basically we weren't allowed to have anything but water in it, and I wouldn't have wanted to anyway because of the protective mask. So what I would do is I would again wrap duct tape around the bottle. I've got my little NC State Wolfpack Wolf on there, and then I would also have a piece of parachute cord so I could have a handle and I could like clip this onto a carabiner if I had to. But I also had a special pouch that fit the Nalgene bottle. I carried a little bit of 550 cord in the middle layer, but I would have a larger amount in the outer layer, i.e. my rucksack. I would use this for shelter construction. It just comes in handy for so many things, and I don't need to tell people how handy 550 parachute cord is. I would carry rations, which of course were the military meal ready to eat, and even though this one's intact, what we would do is called field stripping. And what field stripping is we don't want to carry a lot of unnecessary weight and bulk on a patrol. So I would open this up and I would go through and I would find the things that I didn't want to eat. So for example, if I had saltine crackers and grape jelly, I think it's disgusting to put something sweet on something salty like that, so I wouldn't take the jelly, I would just take the crackers. I'd probably get rid of the heater pack because I'm probably not going to be having time to heat up a hot meal while I'm on patrol. Maybe I would, but anyhow, I just basically go through this and throw away the things I wasn't going to use, and that way I wouldn't have to carry them with me. It was called field stripping. The other thing I would carry in my rucksack would be a slightly more robust first aid kit. Again, back in those days, it was really what we'd call a boo-boo kit now. It was, Band-Aids and iodine and maybe some survival items, like iodine could be used to disinfect water as well as disinfect wounds. But it was only after the global war on terror and we realized that blood loss was accounting for such a huge amount of our casualties that we started carrying things like tourniquets and Israeli bandages and decompression needles for tension pneumothorax. But back in those days, we just had a basic boo-boo kit with things like moleskin and Band-Aids and the kind of things that you'd kind of wounds that you sustain in training, I'll put it that way. Last thing I want to mention that I carried was a bunch of stakes. So I just have these, some type of stake to stake down my poncho shelter that I would make. And I just carry about 4, and if I found that I needed any more to stake down my camouflage net and some kind of hide position I was constructing, I could always use my Leatherman knife to take a stick and whittle a tent stake out of it. So that's what was in my rucksack. I would like to add, though, there's still plenty of room in that rucksack, and the reason is a lot of times we were tasked to carry organizational equipment. So let's say they were going to establish a mortar position. The mortarmen couldn't carry a lot of mortar ammunition, so they might just say, hey, everybody take 2 mortar rounds and drop it off on this point on your way out. That might not necessarily be part of our recon patrol, but things we might carry on a recon patrol would be like a claymore mine. So if I was in my patrol base, I might set up claymore mines on the perimeter, so in case the enemy attacked, I could command detonate these claymore mines. Light anti-tank weapon if we were going to encounter vehicles possibly, or doing some type of anti-vehicular ambush, I'd carry a law. So you're always having to take organizational equipment that didn't necessarily belong to you, so you couldn't really take up all the room in your rucksack with comfort items or anything like that. So anyway, that's what's in my rucksack, and thanks for watching the 3rd video in this series, which is the outer layer. And then I think finally what we're going to do is take all this gear and actually conduct our reconnaissance patrol out in West Virginia and make a video about that.